When an Indigenous woman goes missing, she goes missing twice. First, her body goes missing, and then her story. Hey there, makers! Happy Native American Heritage Day. In honor of that today, we're going to be talking about the crisis of missing and murdered Indigenous women. Because of that, and because this is going to be a really long episode, I'm going to drop all of my pattern deets and stuff in the description box if you are curious to know. This is my Cardi Party cardigan piece. Y'all have seen this before. It's just a basic beanie. And we are going to jump right into the story today. So let me know what you think of this format versus talking about it. I'm curious. But like I said, today I want to put the focus completely on the women who were impacted by this crisis. So before you pick up your projects, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment to tell me what you think of me doing episodes like this. Today's episode is going to be a long one, but I'm going to do something a little different for me, and I'm going to ask that you watch the whole thing. I've never done this before, and I won't do it again, but I'm telling the stories of 4 different missing women today, and seeing their faces, being aware of their stories, that's just so important. With this being the issue that it is, and even though it's getting national press coverage now, and even more so than ever after Gabby Petito's disappearance and her case, it's not being talked about enough. And a lot of the ways that we're talking about it are PR stunts, for lack of a better word. It's been called that by experts in the field, and looking at it myself, yeah, PR stunts. The issue here, it's not just the increase in violence against Indigenous women, it's also the lack of police focus on it. It's the getting dropped through the cracks at unprecedented rates because there's reservation police, and then there's local police, and then when is the FBI involved? When is the state involved? Like, they haven't truly figured out jurisdiction, and they don't work together. They just assume it's the other one's problem, is what I continued to see. It's terrifying, to be honest. Well, this has been an issue for centuries. Dating back to colonial times, Indigenous people have had to advocate for their missing women who were taken by colonials. No one stopped to pay attention to the broader systemic issue that has become the case here until 2016. In 2016, Canada launched a national inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women. That's where the term, or that's where that phrase and that brand, for lack of a better word, came from. In 2018, it was followed by a report from the Urban Indian Health Institute, based in Seattle, Washington, that looked at the health of Indigenous communities and cases of missing and murdered Indigenous women in 71 cities in the United States. I will link that in the description box below if you'd like to take a look. It's very comprehensive, but it focuses on stats and not on stories. And that's very similar. The Canadian website was the best one that I found for finding their names, their stories. You know, have I seen that woman on the street? Can I see a picture of her, kind of thing? But everything else that I've seen is focused on stats. 2020 was also a record year for this issue because a record number of Indigenous women ran for office in 2020, and a record number of them won. That's huge because having a seat at the table and a voice in the room allows them to advocate for Indigenous women in a way that hasn't been done before, and to put funds towards it, to put lawmakers focus towards it, to physically be there and have representation. Like, representation matters for showing people that they have an opportunity to succeed in this country. But at the same time, they shouldn't have to be in the room for us to say that their cases matter. And that's been the case for centuries. I've also seen, and if you follow true crime, you'll notice these cases are often overlooked by the true crime community. I'll admit, this is the first time I've covered one. And in researching for this, this was supposed to be the episode 3 weeks ago, and it got pushed back. And I've had to put a lot more work into researching for this than I have others, and I'm happy to do that. I decided that this is something that I was going to tackle, and we were going to do a long episode, and I put in the work. But the amount of work to find information about these cases versus others is dramatically different. It's easy to find the one or two that's been covered a lot, but it is hard to find a cold case the way that you could a cold case that's listed on the website, or like last week's, where Iowa has a like cold case files site that helped me find first of all, the case in general, and then also what's the local newspaper I need to be looking at, what were the dates, who am I searching, like all of that information was there on their site. With this, you're lucky if you find a name, and even luckier if you find a link. You know, for all of the advanced news coverage that's been happening this year around and talking about, you know, how Gabby Petito's case shed light on missing and murdered Indigenous women and the fact that their cases don't get that kind of coverage, the articles still aren't covering the cases. They're just talking about it. And when they do talk about a specific individual or that specific individual's advocate, which is more often than talking about the individual who is missing, they're not linking to anything. It really stood out to me when I read an article about specifically talking about Gabby Petito's case, bringing more awareness to this, and every single time they had Gabby Petito's name, they were linking to more articles about her case. But when they covered the missing and murdered Indigenous women, first of all, they didn't include their photos. They only included one of their names. The other two, they only included their advocates' names, and they didn't include a link. That's not better coverage. That's a buzzy headline. We need to do better. And the way that we get media to do better is by engaging with the articles that they do right. Because the true crime community, we love those news articles. We know it. You do it, I do it, we all do it. I'm not crocheting for this part because I really want to connect with you on it. But if you see an article about a missing or murdered Indigenous woman or any person of color or, all of it, click the article. Click the link, go to the page, read it. Spend time on the page, click an ad. Show the news website that you are on that people care about these cases. And yeah, one of us doing it is a drop in the bucket, but if enough of us do it, that's a bucket of water. And that's change. So before I get into the stories, if you don't take anything else away from this, or if you don't have any information about these, you've never seen these women, you never see these women, most of us will walk away from this case that way. But please think about it next time you see an article for a missing woman, especially a missing Indigenous woman, anyone that's not missing white woman syndrome, read their story. Take the time. You could save their lives. Okay, so now that I'm off my soapbox, you got the message, we're all gonna click the articles, let's get into their stories. We're gonna start today with Cheyenne Marie Fox. Cheyenne was 20 years old, and she was the proud mother of a 5-year-old son named Xavier. Here's a picture of the two of them together. He's super cute. And she's also a member of the Wikwemikong First Nation in Manitoulin Island, Ontario. I am really going to work on my pronunciations this time, guys, but you know how it goes with me. It's questionable. I'm trying. I looked up how to pronounce these things. So on April 25th of 2013, Cheyenne's body was found below a Toronto high-rise where she had landed after falling from the 24th floor. The Toronto police determined, with, according to Cheyenne's family, very little investigation, that there was no evidence of criminal activity, despite the fact that 911 had been called 4 times that day. But obviously her father disagrees, and I do too. So today we're going to tell you Cheyenne's story. Cheyenne, she was born in Sioux Lookout, which was 350 kilometers north of where they were. It was in kilometers. I don't know what that is in miles. I'm in America. We speak different languages on distance. But she did have a somewhat challenging childhood. It's I don't want you to judge what happened to her by her childhood, but I am going to tell the whole story because you don't have to be perfect to be valid when you go missing or when you die. So, she, as a child, spent her time living split between her mother and father who had separated. As she got older, she also spent time in detention centers. Cheyenne was said to have an issue with authority, but really her issue was she was very compassionate, very caring, and very passionate about things in general. She didn't judge anybody, but she wasn't afraid of a fight, and she really didn't see the need to respect authority that hadn't earned her respect, or to respect anyone that hadn't earned her respect, for that matter. She would fiercely defend the people and things that she loved according to those who knew her. Even from a young age, Cheyenne's Anishinaabe culture was a huge part of her life. She went to drumming socials, powwows, and smudging ceremonies. She even became a jingle dancer, which, if you look up the photos, means that she was covered in little tiny bells and would dance as a part of the ceremonies in that culture. She loved it, and that was something that she always chose to participate in. Even as she got older, she continued to participate when the other parts of her life became troubled. As her father puts it, when she was 15, she went to a powwow, and 9 months later, she had a baby. Which is really to say she did get pregnant after a powwow. And that's how she became pregnant with her son, Xavier. After giving birth to Xavier, she did move to the reservation to live with Xavier's father for 2 years. The two of them, I'm not sure what their relationship status was. It's hard to find much information at all on these cases. But the two of them did live together for those 2 years. And after the 2 years, it was said that Cheyenne got a little restless. And she left the reservation at that point to head to Toronto. Cheyenne's goal was to be a hairstylist or a beautician. And so she did have plans to go to school for that. She briefly stayed with her father and stepmother before heading downtown into the city, where she was planning to get an apartment and start school. Unfortunately, her plan didn't quite work out, and she ultimately ended up in an Aboriginal women's shelter called Andayan. She did spend some time in jail over the next 2 years. She got into a fight. As I said before, she was very passionate, and so she did get into fights, and she was in trouble for that several times throughout her life. A lot of times it was said that it was to defend herself, but she was in jail. And she kind of fluttered around odd jobs for a while until she began working as an escort. She got involved with a woman named Tia, or who went by Tia, and again, like I said, began working as an escort with Tia. It's also worth noting that in the time that all of this had happened, she was definitely sexually assaulted. And I say definitely because there were alleged sexual assaults, but there was one that actually had gone to trial. And at the time of her death, the prosecutor was still being persecuted tried in the system. So that happened actually the year before her death. So at this point, she's fallen in with Tia, and she is working as an escort. The few weeks leading up to her death, nothing really changed. And I say that to mean, because it was ruled that there was no criminal activity and ruled as a suicide, you would expect, or you may expect, to see behavioral changes. I'm generalizing here. In some cases, that's not the case, right? But nothing changed on her social media. She was still posting photos, tagging friends. She shared videos, all of the things that were normal for her social media page. She posted selfies of trying out new looks with her hair because she wanted to be a beautician. On the day of her death, she was tagged in photos from Tia earlier in the day. The two were together much earlier. But kind of the saga of events that led up to her death started around 6 p.m. On that day. So we're really, at this point, piecing this together with 911 calls. So I'm going to kind of walk you through the different calls that happened throughout the evening that ultimately led to Cheyenne's death. Around 6 p.m., there were actually 2 calls made, but the main one that we'll talk about is a driver on the 401 highway called to report a young woman jumping from a cab in slow-moving traffic. This is like a highway. This is a major road. And she jumped out of the cab. The other caller who called to report this described it as her falling out of the cab. But they both agree that, you know, she was in the car and then she was not on a major highway. This woman was Cheyenne. And the first caller, or like the main caller that we talk about here, actually picked her up. He offered her a ride and dropped her off at a condo building in North Toronto, which she had asked him to take her to. She alleged that the cab driver had sexually assaulted her and that she had jumped out of the cab to get away from him and to protect herself. So obviously there were 2 911 calls. The police never actually responded to the calls. Cheyenne was not picked up, you know, are you okay? Do you want to press charges? Any of that. It didn't happen. They just kind of took note and moved on. So we know that she went to this condo building in North Toronto. So they didn't know at the time, but we later find out that, Cheyenne had chosen to go to that condo building in Toronto, to meet an alleged customer for her escort services that she was doing. And she's there for a long time because the first calls, one report said 6 p.m. and the others said 9, or most of the time I saw it said 6, then one thing said 9 p.m. and I think it was a typo. But again, it's really hard to corroborate stories with this because there were like 3 articles total. But I went with the time from her father's claims, right? So by that timing, she was picked up at around 6, and that's when the call was made. Presumably she was dropped off within the next hour. I'm not sure if the call came before he picked her up or after he dropped her off. But she was dropped off at this condo building, and the next call came in moments before she fell. So the call for her, like having fallen to her death, came in at 11:30 p.m. So presumably this next call came in around like 11:20-ish. I'm piecing together the timeline here. I'm going to have to do a lot of that in this episode. I'm sorry. But the second 911 call came just moments before she fell from the condo. Not much about this call has been made public, but her father's lawyer said in interviews with the media that the dispatcher spoke to a male individual on the phone and Cheyenne during the course of the conversation, and that it was clear that Cheyenne was intoxicated. This was confirmed in the autopsy of her body. Another source says that there was actually another 911 call that happened before the call for like her being on the ground. But another source says that this third 911 call claimed that there was a woman dangling from a balcony shortly after the second 911 call. This wasn't in the official claim from her father, but this is cited in 2 of the 3 articles I looked at. So I don't know if they're from the same source or what, but allegedly this call did come in as well. The police actually didn't respond until a final call was made after Cheyenne fell to her death that day. She was very intoxicated when she died, but if she was dangling from the balcony, that I think that may rule out suicide. I'm just saying. Anyway, so that was the 4th, maybe 5th 911 call that day relating to Cheyenne. And the first time that she actually got the police's attention. Well, I mentioned her father's lawyer before. Her father did contract with a lawyer, Emily Hill, and they filed a lawsuit in which they claimed that Cheyenne was, quote, a victim of human traffickers who befriended her and exploited the fact that she was a vulnerable young Indian woman. Their alleged intent was to convert her into, quote, an involuntary sex worker, so sex trafficking. It also alleges that the police might have known that Cheyenne was a victim of human traffickers based on the first 2 calls. or just like based on something that was said in those calls that we didn't get to hear, right? So the police may have actually known this and still not responded to help her. It does criticize the police. It says that if they had responded to those initial calls, that Cheyenne never would have gone to the condo where she ultimately died. It also states that there was scheduled to be a lie detector test for the man who was never named, but who was the last person to be with Cheyenne while she was alive. And her father believes that this man murdered his daughter. Let's be very clear. But this lie detector test was scheduled, but never completed. The police were never really straight with Cheyenne's family about what was going on. They had to push hard to get any information, and they really just got bits and pieces. And her father described it as, they didn't look at much other than what was right in front of them, and they really didn't look at that much either. It was barely an investigation, according to the interviews that he's done. But looking at all of it and, hearing her story, I'm going to extrapolate my own opinions a little more in this episode. But my opinion here is that Cheyenne was a fighter. It's clear in her behavior before this, she didn't really have put much salt into authority that she didn't respect. And she was kind of headed down a slippery slope of a really bad situation. So if she had gotten to this place and her alleged customer had stepped outside of her boundaries or attempted to kidnap her or anything had happened, right? I think Cheyenne would have fought. Obviously there was an altercation that happened, right? Because there was that call to the police that came from inside the condo that they were in on the 24th floor moments before she fell to her death. Both of them spoke to the dispatcher. So we know she was alive at this point. It's absolutely wild to me that they didn't investigate that man deeper or publicly clear him, because they did neither of those things. I had that reaction a lot as I was researching these cases, that it's wild to me that they wouldn't do this, and I think that's my privilege showing a little bit. But I think it's important that we all realize that this is how things happen, and that even more so than typically, the family has to be an advocate. And you'll hear that in 3 of the 4 stories that we tell today, or that we talk about today, that the family had to advocate, and even still, it's unresolved. In the eyes of the Toronto police, it is a closed case, although they did mention that they wouldn't release the full call of the third 911 call because there was something that was still under investigation, which confuses me if it's a closed case and a suicide. But the family and the website that I found this on consider this case to be unresolved, and that it should be reopened, which I agree. Up next, I want to tell you the story of Cecelia Barber Finona, who went by Cece. She vanished from her home in New Mexico on May 30th, 2019. And in that home, she lived with her boyfriend and her mother. Cece was 59 when she went missing, and was both an Army veteran and an Indigenous woman. Her daughter Julietta had actually spoken to her the day before she went missing, so on May 29th, and they discussed plans for her nephew's upcoming graduation. They, Cece was very excited about it. All this to say, there was not a plan to run away that was happening. The other thing that I think is important to note with that is, if she was planning to run away, her mother would have known about it, to get away from her boyfriend, because her mother was living with him too. But Cece, so she went missing on May 30th. She wasn't reported missing until June 1st. And that was when her mother, who, like I said, lived with the couple, filed the report because she thought that the two of them had left on a trip or something. Both of them were gone, Cece and Jerry. But she found Cece's purse and ID in the home. And she knew Cece wouldn't have left, especially because they had taken her truck. Her truck was missing. And she wouldn't have left without those things. So she called the police and reported her missing. In that report, her mother also explains that there was a fight that the night of May 30th. Cece and Jerry had gotten into a pretty serious fight and had left after that. So something was off, right? So the Farmington, New Mexico detectives come out and they search the place. They're looking around, and what they found was so bad that at the time they didn't release what they had found to the media. They just said, quote, "Evidence found at the home led Farmington detectives to be very concerned for the safety of Cecelia." That's never a good sign in a missing persons case. Never good. You don't want that. Recently, the court documents were released, or some of them were, and this evidence was released with it. And what they found was potting soil sprinkled in an apparent effort to hide a blood trail that stretched from the porch to the driveway. They also turned up a single blood-coated eyeglass lens, which, if you remember from Cece's photo, she did wear glasses. So it wasn't looking good. 5 days later, on June 5th, they arrest Jerry J. in Las Vegas. Jerry was arrested for using Cece's credit cards after she was reported missing. He had her credit cards, and she was not with him when he was arrested. They actually, so looking back at like the banking information in the files, he had withdrawn a total of $1,200 from ATMs in New Mexico, Arizona, and Nevada over the few days that he had been gone, and that he and Cece had both been gone, really, because we don't know where Cece is at this point. But he was arrested at that point, and he has been in jail since then. He's been held on those charges, and other charges have been filed. So at that point, the coverage completely stops. They hadn't found anything else. Obviously, there's searches that happened, but she wasn't found until February of 2020. So in February of 2020, there were human remains found in Clark County, Nevada, which was the same county that Jerry J. was arrested in, near Las Vegas. It took several months because the human remains were obviously decayed pretty substantially, but they were DNA matched to Cece. And so that was her body that had been dumped there in Clark County. At that point, they did file first and second degree murder charges against Jerry J., and he is in prison awaiting trial for them today. He has not been convicted of anything yet. The trial's been delayed. A lot of trials have been delayed because of COVID, so his is one of them. While the blood was found and the eyeglass lens was found in the New Mexico home, Jerry took a couple-day-long road trip across several states. And so it begs the question of why he brought Cece with him that whole way, if she was already dead, or if she wasn't dead, where did the blood come from? At what point did she die? And did he know he was about to be caught, which is why he dumped her body, or did he just choose near Vegas to dump her body because he thought it would be harder to identify her? I'm not sure. I think a lot of these things, assuming that Jay's the one who murdered her, right, because he has not been convicted at the time of recording this, but I think a lot of these things will come out in trial. At least I hope they will. And I do hope that her family gets closure on this. Because could you imagine being her mother, living in the home with the two of them, and then he just takes her, and then she turns up dead months later? Whew. Yeah. Anyway, so if you do have information about Cece's case, whatever information that may be, the information to contact the police, the Farmington Police Department, and the detective who's working specifically on this case will be in the description box. I've included information to contact for every single one of these cases in the description box. So if you see something that is memorable, please call. No detail is too small at this point. And the more of us that pay attention to it, the better chance there is that there's going to be an investigation. Our next missing woman is Ashley Loring Heavy Runner. You may have heard her name as Ashley Loring before in news. She is one of the most covered cases, but I did want to cover her case here just to show you the level of effort that had to go in to get this kind of coverage, and also to share her story. So Ashley was 20 years old, and she was studying environmental science at the Blackfeet Community College on the Blackfeet Indian Reservation. She was in the Montana side. It kind of stretches between two states, as I learned on our next case. But she was on the Montana side when she disappeared on June 5th of 2017. She actually was an advocate for missing and murdered Indigenous women. So the Canadian inquiry came out in 2016, and she saw this and actually said to her sister, like, hey sis, this is a big issue. Like, we need to be talking about this. We need to be looking into this. And I'm sure she had no idea and never dreamed at the time that she would become one of them. And that her story would push her sister Kimberly to be one of the biggest advocates for them in the United States. So on June 5th of 2017, Ashley had stopped by her parents' house earlier that day and was seen by several eyewitnesses at a party that night. But no one had seen or heard from her since. And it did go several days before she was reported missing. I didn't find exactly how many because, to be honest with you, they don't talk about the police much when they talk about this story. But it did go several days because Ashley had a bit of a reputation for losing and breaking phones. Didn't we all back in the early iPhones? Like, those things just broke. Anyway, she was kind of known for that, and so a day or two of not hearing from her was not a huge deal to her family. However, 3 days, 4 days plus, as the days continued to stack up, they started to get worried. And so they started looking for her. 2 weeks after she was last seen, someone called the family with a tip. And they did come directly to the family. Just, police? No? Yeah. So someone called the family with a tip and said that on the night that Ashley had disappeared, they'd actually seen a young woman running away from a car on Highway 89, which goes through the reservation. They searched the area where the woman was seen. It's kind of on the northern edge of the reservation. And in that area, they found a tattered sweater and a pair of red-stained boots. Just red-stained. We don't know what. But her sister Kimberly says that the family is very certain that these items belong to Ashley. And they actually were able to corroborate with an eyewitness who had seen Ashley at the party that night that the sweater matched the one the witness remembered Ashley wearing at the party. So all signs seem to point to, like, this is where something really bad happened to Ashley, especially those red stains on the boots. Like, that's not great. I don't know what color the dirt is there, but I don't think it's red. I think that's a South thing. So, like, clearly something had happened here. The family and the search party handed the evidence over to the law enforcement for DNA testing. And according to what they've said, they did everything right with chain of custody and taking care of it right. Called law enforcement to pick it up. But 4 years later, they still haven't gotten any results to say for sure that those were Ashley's clothes, or that, like, if that was Ashley's blood on the boots, if it was something else, if there was anyone else's blood on the boots. Like, that's a huge clue. So at that point, Kimberly really took up the torch from Ashley and became an advocate for her sister. This is why you may have heard her story before. So Kimberly has told her family's story and relived this trauma everywhere from, quote, the Rocky Mountains to the halls of Congress. She testified in 2018 before the Indian Affairs Committee about her belief that her family was ignored by many different law enforcement agencies, including the tribal police, the local police, state, and now the FBI, because the FBI is now investigating this case. Kimberly even collaborated directly with a missing persons true crime podcast, which I will link in the description box if I can find the episode, and searched for her sister herself in the woods. Like everybody was out there searching. And as of today, when I'm recording this, Ashley has never been found. And I say that like Ashley has never been found dead or alive. So I'm going to put up her photo again. Ashley, if she's alive out there somewhere today, she would be 24. Which, I mean, I'm 24, so that hits pretty close to home for me. She was described at the time of going missing as being 5'2" and weighing about 90 pounds. So very small stature. Probably would look younger than she is if you saw her out and about. She has brown hair, brown eyes, and her style, if she's choosing her own clothing, was always what she would call country chic. So, Ashley, this is Ashley. If you know anything about this, if you think you've seen her, please contact the FBI's Salt Lake City field office or call 1-800-CALL-FBI. All of that information is in the description box. Like I said, she may really be alive out there somewhere. And it's just waiting for the right person to see her photo and say, I think I saw her today. I'm reminded of that story of the young woman who showed a hand sign off of TikTok and was found several states away from where she went missing because of that, because another car on the highway recognized it, right? So we may still find Ashley alive, and I really hope that we do. This last story, I want to show you what most of these cases look like. And what I mean by that is the first three that we've talked about, someone was their advocate. With Cheyenne, it was her father, and the lawsuit that he filed is the reason that we have most of the information that we do about her case. With Ashley, it was her sister Kimberly. And with Cece, it was a combination of her family and the fact that she's an Army veteran that caused her case to get the attention that it did. This final case didn't have any of those things. The family didn't take a public seat, which really, that's not your responsibility. If your loved one goes missing, you shouldn't have to step into the public eye for them to be found. This case, I had a hard time even finding the name. And it's pretty much the same two sentences about the case anywhere you find it online. I found it on the Yakima Reservation website listing the vanished women from their community. It's clearly a low budget thing, which, I mean, I'm glad it's there, right? Like, thank goodness. But the age listed in the profile was 2 years out of date. Hadn't been updated in a while. And the police report that it links to is less than 150 words. Very, very bare bones. There's just so little information on her disappearance that if you Google this woman's name, web sleuths and a dream predictions site are on page 1. Which, if you know anything about like SEO and Google, like those things are usually buried on like the 5th or 7th page, right? Like they're way back there. But for this one, they're on the first page. Because I was not able to find an actual like news publication source with her name in it. But my research here got a little scrappy. I had to kind of play match up with a few things, but I dug up some information and connected the dots to tell you the story of Roberta Raines. So Roberta, she was also known as Bertie, and she was last seen in Toppenish, Washington on July 10th, 2001. She was originally from Alaska, but was in Washington at the time, and she was 19 years old on the day that she was last seen. I say she was last seen that day because she wasn't reported missing until 2002. However, when she was last seen, she was with a man named Jose Merced Zamora. Jose, not a great guy. I don't know the nature of the relationship between the two of them, but I do know that according to Jose, Bertie was with him in 2002 when she was reported missing by her family, who just simply hadn't heard from her like several months. But Jose in 2002 actually murdered a 17-year-old boy named Ole Owens in Yakima County, and then fled to Mexico to avoid charges. He came back to the United States at some point afterwards, but he wasn't arrested or apprehended until 2007 in Idaho, of all places, where he was arrested by the Blackfoot Police. Remember them from Ashley's story a minute ago? Yep, so they're the ones who arrested him. The police were called not because Jose was seen and, tied to the murder from 2002, but actually because he started shooting at other drivers on the highway. Yeah, just, shooting at other motorists while driving down the highway. This turned into a 20-minute police chase before they were able to blow out his tires by shooting them and capture him. He did throw all of his guns out the window a few minutes before he was captured, and it took them a week to find the guns. The guns he had with him at that point were not tied back to Ole's murder, but they did have pretty convincing evidence that it was him who had committed that murder. So the Idaho police take him into custody, and the Washington police from Yakima County come out to interrogate him because, this guy murdered somebody in their county. They want to talk to him. And when they come out, they do ask him about Bertie because it's a missing persons case, and he is listed on the case as her last known associate. So, flagged something in the system. And when he's asked about her, he says that, she fled to Mexico with him in 2002, and she left him when they were in Mexico. That, she had gone her separate ways from him, and that he didn't know where she was. I don't know if I believe that. This guy's a murderer. This guy literally got arrested because he decided that it would be fun, or for whatever reason, he was just gonna shoot at other drivers while driving on the highway. I take anything he says about somebody just, casually left in another country where, nobody has a way of finding her. I question that. You should question that. But yeah, he said that he doesn't know her current whereabouts. So Jose, he was eventually brought back to Washington, and was in jail in Yakima County. He was charged with second-degree murder for Ole Owens and was sentenced to 7 to 14 years. So in 2014, he was moved into a residential re-entry program. So it was about 7 years later, if that. I guess time served during the trial would put us right about at 7 years. But while he was put into that program, he was supposed to be serving 9 months there before he re-entered society. After 1 month, he actually just escaped. And by that I mean it wasn't anything too complex. He just kind of walked out. But escaping from that and that situation is considered felony escape. So he was featured on Washington's Most Wanted in 2014 on August 29th in that episode. And I didn't find anything indicating that he was ever captured. So they don't have him to ask him more questions about Bertie. I don't know that that's even really crossed anyone's mind. Just based on the fact that there have been no news articles about her ever. And that police file, it was uploaded into NAMU? NAMU. It was uploaded into this missing persons database. But other than that, there's been no movement on the case. And it is, at this point, a cold case. So today, Bertie would be 39 years old. Because she was 19 in 2001 when she was last seen. I'll put her photo up again. She may be out there somewhere too. She would be much older now, double her age in that picture. But if you know her, if you've seen her, I'll put the information in here and in the description box to contact with any information that you have about her case. Those are the 4 stories. I wish I could have covered every single one of them. I wish I could have even found all of their names. it's like I said, we need to actively look for these cases so that we can give signals to the media that we're going to read these stories, and so they should publish them. You can find a lot of information out there on what's being done, especially if you live in a state where there are reservations and there is a larger Indigenous population. Look into it. See what you can do. There are thousands of petitions. I wish I could cover it all. I really do. But if you're listening to this video and you've made it this far, which I hope everybody who started this video made it this far, because this is the only video out of any that I will ever make that I will ask you to watch the whole thing. But if you've made it this far, go do some research about the missing women in your area. Okay, so now that we've talked about their stories, I do want to tell you some of those numbers that are in all of the news articles. So the first one is Indigenous women are 10 times more likely to be murdered. So their murder rate is 10 times higher than the rest of the population. More than 4 in 5 American Indian and Alaskan Native women have experienced violence in their lifetime. More than 4 in every 5, like more than 80%. In 2016, 57,000 Indigenous women and girls went missing from across the country, according to the Urban Indian Health Institute that did a report. Of those 57,000, only 116, like 116, were logged in the Department of Justice's database. That's less than 1%. That is a massive, that's less than 0.1%. Like I'm not even going to do them until oh my God. This is a systemic issue. There is systemic racism in law enforcement. We've been talking about this a lot since 2020 and just all of the ways that this is happening. This is yet another one of those ways. In general, even within minority communities, Native Americans and Indigenous people are often a forgotten group. The Native Americans as a group also experience high rates of police brutality, which leads to distrust in police. And so things like with Ashley Loring Heavy Runner's story, where we're not even sure exactly when the family got the police involved or what that looked like, because in the tellings of the story, the police are never really mentioned until we talk about how they didn't do anything. There's also the issue of tribal law enforcement versus local law enforcement and who owns the case that we talked about at the beginning, that causes so many of these cases to be dropped or simply just poorly investigated, because the tribal law enforcement goes to the edge of the reservation and then local law enforcement starts, and they're so concerned with stepping on each other's toes, or that's the excuse, that they simply don't search across lines. When in reality, you can just walk across the lines. It's the same as state-by-state issues, right? And the final one that I want to bring up is missing white woman syndrome. Look, it's not a perfect system, but 51% of white victims in Wyoming in 2016, when this study was done, received media coverage. 51%. That's not great, but 51% is better than nothing. And obviously, like, different levels of investigation are happening, right? In that same period of time, 18% of Indigenous female homicide victims in Wyoming received media coverage. That's a huge difference. So the missing white woman syndrome, it was a term coined by a PBS news anchor in 2004, and it's stuck. And it is our society's fixation on finding the white woman. We saw it with Gabby Petito. However, white women are seen as the victim every single time. And like, I mean, we saw it in the way that Gabby Petito's case was reported. Like, we're all analyzing that video, and we should have been, right? Like, that was good. But the way that we did that, and the way that we, a YouTuber went back through her old footage, and that's how Gabby's body was found, like, that would never happen for one of these other cases, because it just doesn't make international news. the way that Gabby did. And that's really sad. The other thing, and it's a systemic racism problem, and it is very uncomfortable for me as sitting in front of you as a white woman to say, but I'm going to call it out because, damn it, somebody's got to say it. The perception of the cases is different. People are more likely to see someone who looks like me as a victim than they are to see an Indigenous woman as a victim. A woman named by the name of Echo Hawk, or her last name's Echo Hawk, in an interview with CNN said that these Indigenous women are more often than not blamed for their own cases. I actually saw some of that looking into Cheyenne Fox's disappearance, saying, well, she was a sex worker. She had been in jail before. She had a child at 15. She was violent. There was no criminal activity. How could there have been? It was on her. Without even looking. Without looking at the fact that there were 5 911 calls made that day, and the police didn't respond to it until the 5th. And that was when her body was on the ground after falling 24 floors off of a Toronto high-rise. Like, what? She jumped or fell out of a taxi cab on a major highway, and the police didn't respond. What? But that's the thing. So, because, as Echo Hawk said, these women are often blamed for their own cases, there's a lack of empathy, and there are assumptions made by the public, by the media, and by law enforcement. Cheyenne Fox's father's lawsuit said that the police might have known that she was a victim, and that she was being pulled into human trafficking and sexual trafficking. And if they did, that just nails this point home. I don't know the right thing to say because I don't think there is a right thing to say. But I think we need to go back to something that we've been saying around the Me Too movement for a while, and that is believe women. That is also, you don't have to be perfect to be a victim, and that applies to every single victim. I don't care if they were drunk. You shouldn't either. Police shouldn't either. Like, yes, Cheyenne was drunk when she died. So what? It's also possible that Ashley was drunk because she was coming from a party and she was underage. That doesn't change the fact that somebody saw her being chased by a car down a highway. That doesn't change the fact that her sweater was found and her boots were found. Believe women. Put your focus onto women who don't get the focus that they deserve and that their cases deserve. And if you have any information at all about the cases that we talked about today, the information to contact the law enforcement involved is in the YouTube description right below. Thank you for those of you who made it this far. I personally feel a lot of feelings about this. I'm very upset. This research has been challenging for me, and I've pushed through it because this is important. If you feel that way too, let's do something about it. Find a petition. Read the news story. Share the Facebook post. Together, we can change this, but this won't change unless we care. Okay. That one was more serious than normal, but this is a very serious issue. So serious that the CDC has actually labeled it a crisis. Like, this is a very serious issue. I hope that this inspires something in you, the way that it's inspired something in me. And I hope that we can all celebrate Native American Heritage Day by doing something to protect Native American women. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll talk to you later. Bye.